The Battle of Kursk. This is a game published by Flying Pig Games. It is a big, heavy box full of cardboard and other delightful components. It is part of the Platoon Commander Deluxe system, created by Mark Walker. And if you played other games by Mark Walker before, you know that something that connects them, a certain family resemblance, is a distinctive cinematic feel. Very often they don't feel necessarily like the representations of history, but almost representations of an actual movie about history. And there's of course nothing wrong with that. Battle of Kursk, so we know where we are in terms of theme. We're in World War II, we're on the Eastern Front, we have Soviets versus Germans. And we have a lot of different units, a lot of different scenarios that come here. It's a little bit of a sandboxy game. You have a healthy number of scenarios, plus you'll be able to create your own scenarios, no problem whatsoever. You have infantry and tank mainly, but they're not equally represented. This is definitely a tank-heavy system. The tanks are the protagonist, with sometimes infantry just playing a role in the tragedy, in this tank tragedy. In fact, there are some scenarios in which you only have armored vehicles, but when the infantry is there, it is not irrelevant because, of course, tanks are supported by infantry. They are much more effective in close combat than otherwise. So, two-player game, but also playable in solitaire by a single player controlling both sides and playing both sides at the best of their possibilities. Is not, therefore, you're not pure solitaire, you're not playing against an AI, but if you're able to do the mental switch, and many of us in the wargaming community are, then you can definitely play the Battle of Kursk that way. Let me show you how the game works. The game comes with two mounted maps that can be combined and rotated in different ways to provide you with different types of landscape depending on the scenario that you have decided to play. This is one of the maps, and here's the other, which is already set up for a scenario that I'm gonna play next as soon as I'm done filming this segment. This is scenario 9, the scenario box, so you have a large number of scenarios, and the Germans are coming from here and they will move in this direction, trying to take control of three key objectives that are on top of three hills. One is there, and one is up here. River here, town, hills, a lot of different interesting landscape elements, and definitely I like the maps. They are simple, yes, but still nice looking and very, very functional. To show how the game works, we're gonna move to this map here. So this way I don't have to touch that one. Also, I wanted to have a look at the plethora of markers and counters that we have. The counter trade that you saw there, however, is not included with the game. I added it because I like counter trades. It's just my favorite ways of organizing components for war games, at least. Now, you have different types of units. Units are represented by counters. They are thick, nice looking, double-sided. And so you have counters for units, and then you also have a lot of markers, which also are double-sided. So we have markers representing armor, then we have leg units, and those are the two main groups of units that you find in the game. A lot of information here. Well, you have an image indicating the type of unit that is. Again, the two macro groups being armor and legs. Here you have the combat factor that you use against hard targets, and the background of the behind the numbers also is important. The color of the background tells you the range, and so the kind of modifications that you will have based on the capability of that weapon. Here you have the combat value that you use when firing against soft targets, this against infantry. Here you have the movement factor here in the middle. If there is an explosion in the background of the movement factor, then that means that the unit is able also to move and fire during the movement phase, not just move. Then we have here in the bottom right corner claws assault values. So as you can see, infantry is not very good when firing at a distance, but they definitely excel in close assaults. And here you have an armor factor, and that is why the defensive value for armor vehicles, and that's why only armor has it and infantry doesn't. And you have again a lot of different things. I'm gonna put some German units on the map too to make things more interesting. Now, a turn starts with the initiative phase, in which the players will roll to determine who has initiative. Players will roll a 10-sided die each. The game only uses 10-sided dice. They roll dice, and the highest initiative goes first, the player that rolls the most. Then players will draw action cards. You have cards that will allow the players to perform special functions, special effects. You play the card when it is appropriate based on the indication that you find here, and you simply resolve the effect. You do what the card says. The Soviet player will use the effect on top of the card, and the German player the effect at the bottom. Then you have the rally phase. Units may be disrupted from game effects that happen in earlier turns. A disrupted unit can try to rally, in which case you roll a 10-sided die and you need to roll equal to or lower than the morale of the unit. If that is successful, the unit removes the disrupted marker. Units that are disrupted cannot move, cannot attack. It's really, really bad. All that they can do is to defend in close combat, but when they defend in close assault, their close assault value is halved. Just really, really bad. As for morale, super important. Unless the scenario instructions tell you different, the Germans in this game have a morale of 5, so they have 50% chances of removing a disrupted marker, and the Soviets have a morale of 3, not as much. Actually, it's slightly different because in this game 0 is 0, not 10, so actually the numbers go from 0 to 9. So I guess that for the Germans it's even better, it's even more than 50% when you have 0 to 5 on a scale of 0 to 9. But I'm not one of the greatest mathematicians of our age. If I said something wrong, that would not shock me. Now, you have the rally phase, players try to rally their units, and then you have, very interesting, the fire phase, which is resolved differently from what you have in a lot of other games. It's not an I go, you go, in the sense that everybody on one side will get to fire, and then everybody else on the other side will fire back. During this phase, players alternate, so players get to declare an attack each. So you can say, okay, this unit fires against that one. I resolve that one, and then I mark the unit with a fire marker. In this case, for example, maybe I wanted to use that unit and use the other one as support, and I'll put the fire marker on both. And maybe I disrupted that unit. Then it goes to the other side. I can use any unfired, undisrupted unit to fire. And I'm like, you know what? Now I'm going to use this one to fire against that one. And maybe that's super amazing, and I remove them. And so on and so forth. You go back and forth. So that is a very unusual way of resolving fire, at least in terms of turn structure, but it gives a lot of interaction. And players will want to here reduce, disrupt the enemies before, well, you start moving and you put yourself in the position of resolving close assaults, which will happen later, because it's always better, of course, to attack in close quarter an enemy that has been suppressed or reduced. So players go back and forth until they don't have anybody that can fire anymore, or until they decide that they don't want to fire. We'll talk about fire resolution later. I want to give you a sense of the turn structure. Then it's time to move. If you're not disrupted, you can move up to your full movement allowance. During movement, if the movement factor has that color in the background, you can move and fire. Very good. However, the enemies that have not fired, that are undisrupted and not marked with a fire marker, may opportunity fire. So there is that. Interesting enough, it took me a while to make sure that there is no penalty for opportunity fire. I guess that the penalty is intrinsic in the fact that you're resolving it after everybody got a chance of firing during the fire phase, and also you still get fire, so you cannot attack in close quarter combat. So movement, the moving unit may fire if possible, opportunity fire, so there's still stuff going on, a lot of stuff going on. The difference, however, is for moving, then all one side, starting with the initiative player, all units on one side that can move have a chance of moving, and then all the units of the other player get a chance of moving, so they don't alternate one unit at a time here. So fire phase, movement phase, and then for units that have not fired, that are adjacent to enemy units, those units that did not fire and are not disrupted may declare a close combat assault. After that, you have the house cleaning phase, and then very important, you have the aid and focus marker phase. Each player has two markers such as this one, the aid and the focus marker, and they are double-sided. They show two dice on one side and one die on the other. Basically, this marker will allow you to reroll dice when you're attacking, and this one will allow you to reroll dice when you're attempting to rally. What happens is that during this phase, at the end of the turn, you get to interact with each of your markers twice. Pretty much you get to perform an action with these markers. For an action, you can place a marker, which is not on the board with the one die side face up. Or if it's already there for an action, you can flip it to this other side. Or you can move it up to 3 axes. So this is what you do. You're pretty much planning where you're gonna get better chances of rallying and at the end being successful in combat the following round. As for combat, two types of combat, fire and close assault. Fire combat is resolved on the fire result table of this player aid, and basically you will first check the column that corresponds to the firepower of the unit that is attacking. Now, if you are attacking a leg unit, then you just use your firepower. If you're attacking an armor unit, then you use a firepower which is equal to the firepower of the firing unit minus the armor factor of the opponent. If, for example, this unit was firing against that one, we have 2 minus 2, then we start with the 0 column. And then we have other modifiers, and modifiers usually are column shifts. For example, modifiers based on range. As you can see, depending on the type of weapon that you have, then short range, normal, and long mean different things, but still that means that depending on that, you may get a column shift to the right, which is good for you, not shift to the left, which is bad for you. If also the unit is being supported by another unit in the same axis, you get column shifts. If you have a flank attack, so you're attacking from axes that are not, X sides that are not adjacent, you get a bonus. Successive attacks, after that attack, someone else, hello, shows up to attack, then that also gives you positive shifts. Terrain will give you shifts, usually bad ones, or at least good for the defender. You calculate all of those, and then you roll a die and you cross-reference the result of the die with the appropriate column. Usually there aren't many modifiers on the die roll itself. There may be some superscript numbers on the unit that tells you to modify the die, but again, most modifiers are shifts. What you find there is the number of possible hits on the opponent. Each hit needs to be confirmed. Say we scored 4 possible hits on the opponent, then the opponent takes 4 dice, rolls them, and gets to negate a hit for each, well, morale task pass, that is for each die that is rolled, which is equal to or lower than the morale value. Again, 3 for the Soviets, 5 for the Germans. A hit will add a disrupted marker on a fresh undisrupted unit. A hit on a disrupted unit will reduce it. A hit on a disrupted reduced unit will eliminate the unit. Close combat works in a similar way, but again, you need to be adjacent, and also the attacker gets a chance of getting hit back. What happens is that this time, when you're resolving close assault, you calculate a ratio between the close assault factor of the attacker divided by that of the defender. You're twice as strong, then you're 2 to 1, the attacker is 4 times as strong as the defender, 4 to 1. You find the appropriate column, apply modifiers, roll the d10, cross-reference. And what you have here is on the left of the slash, the number of possible hits taken by the defender, and on the right by the attacker. I want to point this out because in many combat tables that I've seen in other war games is the other way around. The first number applies to the attacker, then to the defender. Not here. Defender and attacker. Again, these are possible hits that the defender needs to confirm first, and then the attacker needs to confirm. If the defender takes more hits than the attacker, the defender has to retreat, and the attacker can move in the X that was just vacated. And this is pretty much a general idea. You have a lot of little other things, dugout markers, tanks that are destroyed are replaced by wrecks that can give a defensive advantage to people that are there. So a lot of other things, mortar and stuff like that. But the general idea is pretty much this one, which is you will draw action cards each turn, have a rally phase, fire, which is a back and forth, move, one side goes, then the other side goes. Close assaults, again, one side declares and resolves close assaults, and then the other one goes. Housekeeping phase, interact with these markers, and pretty much you're done. You continue like this until one of the players has fulfilled the victory conditions of the scenario. The Battle of Kursk is a solid game. It is a little bit of a sandboxy game, as I said, with different scenarios that will present you with different situations. Sometimes you try to take control of an area, some other times you're trying to drive through the map, just different types of interactions that keep the situation fresh. In fact, when you consider the basic game only has 2 maps, I think that the scenarios do really a good job of using them in ways that they make them feel not stale, that really create a lot of action around those basic ideas. And if you only have 2 maps, a lot of variety, on the other hand, is contributed by the units. So many different units, they act in different ways. Yes, they got a lot of information on those counters, and yes, sometimes I wish that the movement factor was in the bottom right corner instead of the middle of the bottom of the counter. It's a small thing, just a matter of habit, because in most of the games it's that way. But in truth, what you have here are the components and the rules that allow you to create really fun, really dynamic situations. And again, if you play games designed around systems by Mark Walker, that's something that you can probably expect. And it works here, and it works here. These are Hollywood representations of World War II, and it works. And it works because it is just fun to see those clashes, those movements of armies, those desperate attacks, those desperate attempts, those reversals of fortune. In particular, what you're going to see here, sort of family resemblance that you will probably find in most scenarios, is really strong, superior German tanks that are gonna blow up Soviet tanks like they're popcorn, but at the same time, the conditions of the scenario put the burden of the attack, put the burden of the main task on the Germans. So you may have scenarios in which the Soviets get massively punched and beaten, but in the sense of like punching, not in the sense of defeated, because the Soviets take massive, staggering casualties. And at the end, you're like, haha, come on, I killed almost everybody. And you realize you got at the end of the game and you haven't been able to take control of that last position that, as a German player, you needed to win. So you inflict massive casualties, and yet you still lose the overall competition. To me, that is fun because it creates a completely unequal, non-symmetrical situation. And if you're playing with 2 players, then simply by switching sides, you have very different perspectives. It makes the game not mirror-like, it adds chrome, it adds flavor to the entire confrontation. And again, there's more flavor than I was able to convey to you from just explaining the basic rules, because of all the special units and what the cards do, so more extra detail there. So what you have here is a fairly simple, really simple, lean core of rules that are absolutely accessible by a newbie in the wargaming hobby. This is definitely an intro level wargame. Somebody who never played wargames, I think, would be able to figure this out. And then, well, then you have a game that is actually fun to play because it moves fast, it has a lot of back and forth. The turn structure itself with the back and forth for firing, that is something that you don't find very often in war games, and it really works well. In a sense, in terms of complexity, in terms of how cinematic it is, somehow the game reminded me a little bit of Conflict of Heroes. Not so much in the mechanics, somehow in the general effect, in general impression that I had. And since Conflict of Heroes has been considered one of the modern classics in introductory wargaming, well, I guess that this is high praise, at least from me, because I definitely enjoyed the Battle of Kursk. It's a really fun game. If you are not a hardcore wargamer, don't worry, you can pick it up, you can enjoy it, you can blow up those tanks, you can see those dramatic, those dynamic, those cinematic actions. It's a lot of fun. Battle of Kursk, big box, a lot of components, a lot of stuff in it, great production values, a couple of minor things here and there about the production that maybe I would have done differently, but then I'm not the publisher, I'm just the player. As a player, I can tell you, I definitely enjoyed the Battle of Kursk. It's a really fun war game.